Please welcome the panel on Charting the Rise of the Podcast Economy, moderated by the founder of Jamie's List, Jamie Patricof.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Thank the Milken Conference. I'm really excited to be doing this. I saw Pitbull open a panel the other day to try and get the energy up. I'm not going to copy his enthusiasm, but that's what I'm expecting for this. I want this to be lively and fun. We have a great group of panelists. And it's really exciting. So I want to start where, the word podcast has become very confusing in some ways. And we're trying to be able to define that word has become really even hard to do. So I asked my friend Scott Galloway for his definition of a podcast. And this is what he said. Would you mind throwing the slide up? Podcast, a noun, a hostage situation where you're forced to listen to brunch conversation littered with mattress and meal kit ads. I'd like to start by going down the line here and having all of you give your definition of a podcast so we can kind of set the table. To my left, I have Jessica, founder of Lemonada. Jessica, we'll start with you, and then we'll just go down.
I like Scott's definition. And when we're talking with talent, which we often are with Josh over here, we're like, everyone wants a podcast. No one wants to make a podcast. It's a lot of work. So a podcast is a lot of work, a good one anyway. And, I think when we think about podcasts at Lemonada, we think about the core audio experience, and then we think about the ecosystem around it, which could involve video, could involve social, could involve live events. But the primary definition for us is that RSS feed that's coming into your ears from one of the awesome platforms out there.
Well, that's a good answer. I think for us at GMD, when we created it, it was really about visual, because we were visual. We were a talk show almost at the very beginning, and audio storytelling. And what has happened as a result of that is that we've really created a movement in the women's health industry that has really changed lives. So for me, it's about a movement.
I think the project of trying to define sort of what is and isn't a podcast is sort of like trying to say what is or isn't poetry. It's really contextual. It's sort of in the eye of the beholder. Any definition that I've seen leaves certain things out. So I think I would quote the Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, I believe, who said, "I know it when I see it."
He said that about pornography. Still a good answer.
I think it's important to, I'm sure you're going to ask the question about why we're having the conversation, because podcasts are evolving. It used to be an audio first medium, and now it's audio and video. I landed on the definition that a podcast is a show designed around the human voice, meant to be consumed on demand. It doesn't need to have an RSS feed, although many do. It doesn't have to have a video component, although many do. But it's really all about being eyes optional, mainly centered on the human voice.
That's a great answer. And look, this is a podcast.
Right.
We're podcasting now. And you are our hostages. Galloway. But a podcast is a show that to me is fueled and built by a community. The community builds the podcast, and a podcast thrives and succeeds when it truly understands what and who its audience is and what they stand for.
I love that. That is great. Such different answers, but at the same time, they all invoke what a podcast is. It's really exciting to be having this conversation today because we have a lot of breaking news in the podcast world today. First, it's some by the panelists and some by the industry overall. It was just announced this morning that the Golden Globes will be giving out the Best Podcast Award starting in 2026. And it's interesting for a handful of reasons, besides just another step forward in the podcasting business and becoming part of mainstream media. The Golden Globes take place at this hotel next year. And the Milken Conference underwriter, Eldridge, actually is one of the co-owners of the Golden Globes. So it's really just says, podcasts are just everywhere. They're a part of everything we're doing. They're a part of our lives, and they're just getting, more and more influential. I want to start, so to my left here, Jessica Cordova Kramer, who's the CEO and co-founder of Lemonada. She's one of the people who's breaking news today. It was just announced that the Swedish podcast company PodX plans to acquire a majority stake in Lemonada. It's really exciting. Congratulations,
Thank
Jessica.
you. We're excited.
Congrats.
So what was the decision behind this, and why was now the right time?
Great question. Brevity is your love language, as it is mine. So I'll try to keep it short. But we founded in 2019, Stephanie and I, and the company has a unique origin story, which is we both lost our little brothers to accidental overdoses 2 years apart. I was working for Crooked Media for years. Stephanie was a complete stranger. I heard her on a podcast. I did what any grieving sister would do and stalk her because I needed a companion to grieve with. And long story short, we decided to make podcasts that would get people out of bed in the morning. Make life suck less is what we say now. And so we founded the company. We each threw a little bit of cash into a bank account. We barely knew each other and started to make podcasts that would help people in a really meaningful way, starting with Last Day. And now we have close to 100 shows. And we always said, if we could be a part of something bigger and continue to make life suck less, we would. And this was that unique opportunity. So we will be PodX's first majority investment in the United States. We're super excited about it. But we get to be Lemonada. We get to continue to lead with the same team, the same incredible, diverse talent, everyone from Julia Louis-Dreyfus to David Duchovny to Hassan Minhaj and more. It seems like the best of both worlds, and we get to make life suck less across the world now.
That is really exciting. Another person breaking news today is Hernan Lopez. Hernan was the founder of Wondery and now Owl & Company. And you've been in this business a long time now. You've done a lot of research. And today you just released your report, The Global Podcast Economy, A Complete Picture. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot to that report and give us kind of a couple, what inspired you to do that, and what are kind of some of the one or two most interesting or dynamic findings that you found?
Of course, what inspired me to do the report is that when I started Wondery in 2016, the total industry was thought to be $100 million in advertising revenue, mostly from the US. There were no programmatic ads or off-scale. There were very little in the way of other forms of monetization. And the industry had not come together to even try to measure the total size of the total scale. I saw Wondery in 2020, and then I kept seeing news about the size of the podcast industry being undercounted because the estimates didn't take into account video advertising, didn't take into account consumer revenue, what people pay for podcasts directly or sometimes indirectly, didn't take into account work for hire, branded podcasts. So what I published today is a study that attempts to count all of that. The headline number is $7.3 billion in 2024. That's the total size, by my estimate, of how much money was spent around the world in podcasts, in advertising of any kind, audio and video, consumer revenue, and branded and work for hire. And one of the things that I found very interesting and very rewarding in connecting with people who had been in the early stages of podcasting and continue to bring it forward is that the ways of monetizing and turning engagement into revenue have evolved so much. They go from scrappy to very sophisticated. But what I think is very important is that I still believe that the podcast industry is being undervalued. That 7.3 billion number is probably a fraction of what it should be based on the total engagement that the industry gets.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. How can people find that report?
It's on owlandcod.com.
Okay, great. I want to go to Meiselas Haney, who's co-host of SheMD podcast and CEO of Ovii Health. We've been throwing around this term community a lot. Ben brought it up in his definition of podcasting. However, I mean, it really, in the kind of new creator economy, it plays such a bigger role, and in podcasting specific. How does it play into the SheMD success and business?
Well, what happened was I saw a white space in the industry for women's health. You know, it's broken for women. And when I met Dr. Ali Abadi, my co-host, I was blown away. Her breast cancer journey, she saved a living woman's life. She's an expert on polycystic ovarian syndrome. 15% of women have it. 75% don't know how they have it. It's the leading cause of infertility. How's everyone not talking about that? So we came together and we created SheMD, and we have really built a community around women who feel that they need to, and we feel they need to become their own health advocates. So we have to arm them with the knowledge and information. We have the biggest celebrities in the world that don't talk about their personal life at all come on and talk about their personal medical journeys, because their goal is our goal, and again is to arm women to be their own health advocate. And we're only a year old, and our community is what makes us. And I think, sort of talking about video versus audio, the video has really helped us. And I'll give you an example. We had Greg Renfro, the founder of Beauty Counter, and her daughter Phoebe, who had PCOS. And when you listen to that story, and we have women that said, after this podcast, our community really responds. If you listen to her story about how she was hospitalized for a year, her journey of being dismissed, that's so powerful. But when you watch it and you see the nuances of it, it'll break your heart. So I think that our community is being built by like I said, it's a movement. It's not even a community. It's become a movement to change the world for women's health.
Right. It's interesting when you think about these communities and preparing for this. I obviously listened to, different podcasts, and, when I was listening to SheMD, it was pretty clear I wasn't the core audience, the core community member. But as somebody who has a wonderful wife and 2 wonderful daughters, thinking about problems with women's health, I was blown away at the honesty of the conversations, and to some extent, I actually felt like I was not welcome at all. I felt sort of like I was eavesdropping almost on a conversation I wasn't supposed to be a part of. How do you handle that?
I love it.
Right.
I think that is the beauty of what we're creating. it's raw, it's honest, but the storytelling leads into the medical information. So after this, Kim Kardashian talking about her psoriasis all over her. Here she is, in the public eye, you would think she's just this picture of beauty. And then she goes through it. And then we arm you after that episode with, hey, if you think you have this, this is what you need to take to your doctor. So the rawness, I cry almost every time. These stories of these women that are dismissed are so heartbreaking, but it's happening all over the world. So I think when you listen to it as a dad and a husband, we want you to listen, because you have to help us change the world for women in this way. So the rawness is really a part of the magic.
Yeah, I was shocked at some of the stuff I was learning. Yeah. I just couldn't believe it was true. We're going out to Ben Meiselas, the founder of the MeidasTouch podcast network.
I like the fighter, though.
Fighter, that's it. You compare the current media shift to moving from a horse and buggy to a car. What do you think legacy media players and advertisers misunderstand most about podcasting, and more specifically, how it relates to MeidasTouch's success?
We've got your audience. If you want to know where they're going somewhere, right? It's not that people have stopped listening to the news. It's not that news is uninteresting. It's like, where are those people going? They're going to podcasts like this, and they're watching it, they're listening, and they're hearing voices that they trust. From an advertising perspective, trust is very important. For them reaching out to their audiences and to their demographics. And for us, the trust of our audience is what allows us to do what we're doing. If we lose that trust, we lose our podcasts. We lose our companies. It's that simple. So our relationships with advertisers, we have to be selective in who we pick to be on our platforms, because trust me, if we pick the wrong advertiser, our audiences revolt and they get pissed. But where there's a marriage of the right advertiser and the right group and the right podcast, there's nothing more powerful that exists today in order to deliver messages. And I think that they still are clinging on to this legacy mindset about TV and the old way CPMs are done when you watch cable news. And so when we're talking about CPMs, cost per millis, cost per 1,000 views, they're still part of the growth story here in the podcast. The CPMs in what we're doing are still relatively lower compared to your cable news, while our audiences are actually bigger, and it's a more persuasive place if an advertiser wants to come on a platform. That's why it's a brave new world. And to your point, I think 7.3 billion is like a fraction. I think when we come here next year, if we're invited, I think that number looks double, and I think it's going to be exponential.
Yeah, my pushback to you would be that, as you're the fighter, so I'm glad you're that far away. On the one hand, you're kind of looking at this legacy media, and you're looking at and you reference this kind of horse and buggy concept, but at the same time, I could make the argument that the MeidasTouch, podcast network, and that you really aren't even a podcast anymore. I mean, you really are in some ways. I'd liken you more to television. I mean, like when I watch, which is amazing, and I'm a big fan. I think it's a fantastic source of news. I love getting information from there. But when I'm watching it, I'm seeing cuts to news clips. I'm seeing everything that I see when I'm watching cable news or I'm watching any other form of sort of TV news, for lack of a better term. So in some ways, I could argue that you're kind of going more towards the old media with this new media. How would you sort of respond, or what's your sort of take on that?
I think the key word here is simulcast, and I think that's where this is all going. Audio podcast has a place, but people still want to see visuals as well. And so I think you can marry both the old legacy media with what is going on YouTube. And, you don't just have to be a YouTuber anymore or a podcaster. That becomes the same thing. When we were breaking into this area, people in the podcast space would say the same thing. You're a YouTuber. By the way, my parents would say, you're a lawyer, Betty, you're a lawyer. Good night. But they would say, you're a YouTuber. We can't, and there's a few podcast selling groups that basically control the market, but there's 5 or 6 big groups. There's a bunch of other groups that control the advertising, but they would look at you and they would say, we don't do YouTube. And I go, I'm a podcaster. What are you talking about? I'm like, all right, want me to prove to you I'm a podcaster? I'm going to take my video and I'm going to put it on an RSS feed. They go, oh, you're a podcaster. I said, yeah, of course I am. And when that clicked, it all changed. And I think that they're like, okay, I guess you're a podcaster. And we were able to sell to both the YouTube advertisers, the podcast advertisers. And my pushback to you is, if you're looking at those charts lately, MeidasTouch is up there on the podcast chart.
It is. No, I mean, listen, it's undeniably one of the most successful podcasts in the world. Josh, I'd love to, it's great that we're at this moment for you as the head of the podcast department at CAA. You see, I'm sure, I can't even imagine the number of new podcasts, both from talent within CAA and then outside it. I guess I have 2 questions for you. One, how do you treat the sort of audio versus video concept? Is every podcast going forward just going to have a video component?
Definitely not. No, there's definitely room for both audio and visual podcasts, and the decision has to fit what the creator is trying to accomplish, right? There's no one-size-fits-all consideration for this. Certainly video is a growing segment of the podcast world, and it's definitely going to keep growing, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a very successful business and achieve your aims doing an audio-only podcast. And it's important to understand what your aims are, right? And that might be to make money, right? It also might be, like in the case of your show, you're educating people, you're reaching, right? Like, I think that there's more to it than just that aspect. And so those are some of the things that come into consideration, the way, like guest booking is one of the things that has changed a lot by going audio versus audio visual, certain shows that are oriented towards interviews. It's a different ask of your guests to show up for a video podcast. It might require glam and hair and makeup, and especially if you're, interviewing actors, people in the public eye, right? There's a lot of thought that gets put into how they're going to present. And so, that could change the type of guests you get. And for that reason, it might be better to do an audio-only podcast where you're going to get better guests, or maybe get more intimate conversations or different types of conversations, So it's truly not one size fits all. Also, the, video podcasting may seem like, oh, we're just taking a podcast and adding video. It's actually, you're entering a whole different industry in a way. The distribution is different. Monetization is different. we've been talking a lot about RSS feeds here, referencing RSS feeds. That's the sort of open distribution model of audio podcasting. Video podcasting, yes, you can distribute through RSS feed, but it's not super common. More likely, you're going to be uploading to YouTube, for instance, and that's not it's not the same as distributing through RSS feeds. That you are putting your distribution through a specific platform, and so that fundamentally changes a lot of things about the business, including including the way that advertising and sponsorship work. And as you referenced, there's like different sets of advertisers that engage in different ways with these. So, it's a pretty complex consideration.
This conversation makes me think of something about sort of the history of podcasting, and I don't want to go too far back, but as a show of hands, who listened to the podcast Serial when it came out, The Story of Adnan Syed? So from what I've read, that really seems to be kind of one of the inflection points in the podcasting business. And Hernan, since you were, I think right at the beginning of founding Wondery at that time, I guess two questions for you. One, can you talk a little bit just about that time in podcasting? But two, are you sort of shocked at how big a role video is now playing in podcasting when you think back to that moment in the history of podcasting?
So Serial was definitely an inflection point for me because I listened to it maybe about a year after it came out, after so many people in my circle kept coming to me and saying, you have to listen. And everybody used the same language, you have to listen. And once I listened, I realized this was something that nobody had created before. It was a new way of engaging and telling stories in a narrative way through audio and meant to be consumed in a serialized way. And it was really that show, followed by Gimlet, that inspired me to start Wondery in an industry where, as I said before, the money wasn't there, the volume of shows weren't there. And my theory was that if you build it, people will come and listen, and then we'll build an advertising ecosystem. So Serial was one inflection point. I think the wave of M&A, of which Wondery certainly was part, alongside with Gimlet and The Ringer and other companies in the space. Then on the tech side, Megaphone was another wave. And now video is another wave. And I think the addition of video, as Josh was saying, is interesting because not only it expands the revenue opportunities that podcasts can get, it's not just AdSense, but podcasts that are on video get a share of premium revenue on both YouTube and Spotify, so they get some consumer revenue. Also, they expand discovery. Most shows today on video are discovered more often than audio-only shows, just because of the way the algorithms work. But every creator has to look at that against the trade-offs that Josh was talking about. You mentioned booking. Another one is editing. If you're doing an interview-style show where the interview is done over 3 hours, cut to on 1 hour, you really can't do that as effectively as well on video. It's another different skill set. And if you're a narrative podcast like the ones that Jessica's company makes, that are great, it's really hard to add video to a narrative podcast without finding yourself competing with true full-blown documentaries that are shown on streaming platforms. So every creator has to find what's best for them. But yes, I do think that video is going to be a big part of the future. It's a big part of the present. By my estimate, about 30% of all podcast revenue today comes from video.
Do you guys think there is a kind of equivalent yet in video? I mean, Ben, obviously, video has been a critical part of your podcast. Jessica, I'm sure for all of you. But have we seen the inflection point yet? What are one or two of the examples you can point to, or have you not seen it yet?
I mean, the example I would point to is just YouTube. And YouTube being viewed now as one of the, if not the biggest podcast platform. To your point, you're saying YouTube is a podcast platform. I mean, who would have ever thought about it like that? To me, that's an inflection point where you go, whoa, something must be happening big with video here. And I've just noticed as well, especially over the past 6 months, the amount of video news podcasts that are looking a lot like the types of news podcasts that we've been doing for 2 or 3 years. They're everywhere now. And it seems that what you're watching too is people leaving cable news, and I'll give you some data points as well here. Someone like a Don Lemon leaves CNN, He has an independent media company. His podcast is video and audio on YouTube. You're seeing that model play out over and over again. We announced on the MeidasTouch network that Katie Fang, leaving MSNBC, she's going to have her show and her audio podcast on the MeidasTouch network. That's a natural landing spot for people like that to go who didn't have a landing spot to really go before. They would just kind of be free agents, and then they'd wait for the next cable gig to open up. Now they go, wait a minute. I'm going to have a Substack. I'm going to have a Patreon. I'm going to have a YouTube channel. I'm going to have a podcast. And all of that makes me a podcaster. And by the way, it allows you to attract top talent because it's going to make you money too, which is okay to talk about. I'm not afraid to. You have to attract top talent sometimes, and that requires that you got to pay people well. I'm good with that. And I think the new economy around it's enabling that to happen.
And it allows you to self-publish, which is another important part of it. If you're talent working for a network, the network always owns your work. If you're a podcaster, you're always the one owning your work.
It's ownership. How many times when you speak to talent, we want ownership. We want to control it, and that enables you to do it.
I also think it's behavioral and technological because as long as I've been in podcasting, which is 2017, people have been saying the future of podcasting is video. And for a lot of that time, we're scratching our heads, right? But more recently, the technology just makes it look beautiful. Like 10 years ago, it looked grainy. It didn't look great. It was really rough to put something on video. And now your show, Ben, everyone, it looks like a TV production. You can pop it up on YouTube, and it has changed things quite a bit when that's the right resource. But behaviorally, when I got into podcasting, don't quote me on any of these stats, but they're directionally correct. Something like 20% of people were listening to podcasts in the U.S. When we launched Lemonada, it was more like 30%. That was 2019. It's now way more than half of people regularly listening to whatever the hell we just defined a podcast as, video or audio or both. And that is a really big tip. So when you marry the technological opportunity to take a 2-cam setup, some filters, and one little light and make it look like a TV studio with the behavioral changes of Americans and podcasts becoming a part of their daily lives, you're seeing that inflection point happen. I don't know if it's the start of the tip or we're at the tip or what it is.
That's interesting. With what I've started with Jamie's List, it started off as a membership community and a newsletter, and then I launched a Zoom series called Lunch with Jamie that then I just recently started releasing as a podcast. And the main reason I did that really was just out of ease of making it easy for my members and my community to listen. It was just, I realized it was hard. This was a destination. It was every bi-weekly at Tuesdays at 1 o'clock, and it was hard for people to show up. And I was like, how do I make it easier for people to listen? And, to some extent, I'm actually probably a Luddite in the sense that I personally prefer the audio first version because I'm trained to when I'm going on a walk or I'm in my car. And now that you think, I want to see the video when I'm watching Ben's podcast. I want to see what he's talking. I want to see the clip he's cutting to. But it's in some ways it's great. In some ways it's sort of providing almost a challenge. How do you think when you're talking to new talent about, what the video component is for them?
Yeah, I mean, Josh alluded to a lot of this, but there's both the talent side and the production side. Even in the easiest circumstances, creating a YouTube version of a podcast or starting with the video version of the podcast, it's just a completely different production than the audio. So when we have shows that are simulcast, we are really doing 2 productions. You may record it in the same place, but the audio engineering is totally different from the video engineering. So it splits off pretty much right after the recording is done. How the ads are inserted, all of it is different. So I wouldn't say that it costs double, but you have to kind of think about it that way because it takes quite a bit of time. So do we need video? Do you want video? Those are some of the conversations we're having with talent. It doesn't always require hair and makeup, but it depends, I don't know.
It always requires hair and makeup.
And we are also having the behavioral conversation. Who are you trying to reach? Are you trying to reach women on a walk? Or are you reaching people who are sitting there and watching? And so we're trying to figure out the why of, do we need video? Do we want video? Or is this audio first? And then it is really a different thing to be sitting like this and having a conversation than it is to be maybe on Riverside and talking virtually. The pool of people you can bring onto a show if you're willing to not be sitting in the same place is much bigger than if you are. So we're having all of those conversations show by show. Each show is its own ecosystem, and each host or hosts wants different things. And when you think about the economics of it, you really have to go down the rabbit hole on this stuff so that you can have a show that works economically too.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Podcasting on the one hand, they've talked about this concept of like democratizing sort of content and podcasting. I mean, you at this point, anybody can have a podcast. You don't need anything. You need a phone. I mean, barely. You don't even need a phone. And I think the numbers are somewhere between 4 and 5 million podcasts. I don't know. But the flip side is that it's as hard to create a hit podcast as it is to have a hit TV show or a hit movie. And as a movie producer and TV producer in the day, in my day job, I know how hard that is. So, Josh, I'm curious. I mean, because you obviously are dealing with a lot of talent who create their podcasts, and I think you're also dealing with just regular people coming in and pitching. How is it fair to say that sort of anybody can kind of have a podcast, and how hard is it to create a hit podcast?
It's definitely fair to say anybody can have a podcast. Anybody can start a band. Anybody can write a book. Anybody can act, right? But these are creative fields and they're competitive fields, and that's maybe there was a time in podcasting where there were fewer podcasts and things were growing, and so that could have been strategically a good time to get in. But now as this becomes a more mature medium, it is really hard to get the job where you get to speak to 1 million people no matter what the medium is, So it's absolutely challenging to break through. But I do believe that this dynamic that I'm describing is very good for consumers, for enjoyers of this medium, No one is like, oh my gosh, too many records came out this year. This sucks. No, it's great. You find the music you like, There's this great evolutionary force when you have access to all the music in the world where you can really pick the things that are tailor-made for you and people can try interesting and new stuff and it helps things really evolve. There's fewer gatekeepers. The same dynamic is absolutely true in podcasts. The fact that it is harder to break through is because we are in a place as listeners or viewers where we have access to so many options, right? It's not just about niche, it's also about what do you connect with. And I really think that so much of the consumption of podcasts is driven by the connection element, So much of, if you look at what the biggest shows out there, most of it is not informational. Maybe it has information in it, but most of it, the driving force is the connection between you, the listener, and the talent, right, who is hosting it. People refer to it as a parasocial connection, whatever you want to call it, right? You have a relationship with that person. It's been referenced, like there's all these great studies about how much people tend to trust podcasters as they listen to them. It's because you relate with them like you relate with a friend. I mean, you put on the podcast that you love in your car while you're driving or whatever, and you get the same dopamine rush as if you would, called a friend, right? Like it's these familiar voices you have a relationship with. That's the thing that drives this industry more than anything else. I think this industry is way more about the heart than it is about the head. And so when I'm thinking about what can break through in this space, I mean, yes, let's think about marketing, let's think about the business, et cetera. But there's that je ne sais quoi of like, can this host reach an audience? Can it connect with an audience and hold and keep them?
Right, yeah. Meiselas, I'm curious to talk a little bit of your journey of starting the podcast and where you are today. I mean, it's obviously a very nerve-wracking thing to put yourself out there and to know if anybody's going to be listening on the other end. So, could we, share a little bit of that experience?
So this is my second mountain. I had been in the fashion and media industry for a long time, and I think it was just this combination of me meeting Dr. Ali Abadi. I was co-hosting Molly Sims' podcast and bringing medical experts. And I had looked around at Huber & Lab, Peter Attia, and I was flabbergasted that there was not anything like that for women. And if you listen to those podcasts, there were very few segments that, and I love both of those podcasts, but there was very few segments that I could relate to. So I met Dr. Ali Abadi. She walked in and told me her journey with breast cancer, how she saved Olivia Munn's life, how she was an expert on PCOS, painful periods are not normal, like all of these things that I didn't know. And I just said, this is my next mountain. I'm going to make sure that you get into the lives and ears and eyes of every woman in the world. And, because I'd had so much experience in media, I was able to get a great agent. I was able to pitch this. We sold it. It's just one of those things that we put it together. We filmed it from the beginning. And a week later, Olivia came out with her breast cancer journey, and we were on the cover of People magazine. And it just went like this, like a rocket ship. And like I said, I totally agree with you. It is so much about the emotion and about women feeling seen and heard. And when they hear the stories on our podcast, we get people saying all the time, "You saved my life. I heard your breast cancer story. I now know my lifetime risk of breast cancer. I went and got an MRI earlier." Or, "I have PCOS. I've been dismissed my whole life." And I heard the story with Florence Pugh and her talking about it. But we have real women and other medical experts on our podcast. But it is about this connection. It's about someone feeling seen and heard, and then us being able to arm them with the right information. So it's just been one of those things that it has almost been effortless because there was a major white space and we have filled it. And it's just been incredible.
Great. That's amazing. Change directions a bit. Hernan, Wondery was responsible for some extraordinary television shows, from Dying for Sex, which is on right now, to We Crash, to Dr. Death. How do you see sort of podcast fitting into the traditional kind of television film landscape? And Josh, if you want to chime in, feel free as well, or anybody else.
I think what we did at Wondery at the time is different from what's happening now. We just happen to be creating great character-driven, true stories like the ones you mentioned, Dirty John, The Shrink Next Door, Dr. Death, and they all came out at the time that television streamers were really interested in getting in order limited series. So we ended up optioning 30 television shows. 7 of them actually got made, and Dying for Sex is the latest one. It's on FX on Hulu. I highly recommend it. It's a journey about...
It's great.
Yeah,
it's amazing, actually.
Thank you. I think what's happening today is that streamers are looking, partially because of the success that YouTube has had in the podcast space, are considering openly whether they should be adding podcasts to their offering. Ted Sarandos, in the last earnings call at Netflix, said that there's very little difference between some podcasts and some television shows, and as some of those podcasts become more part of the everyday conversations, you can see a scenario where they could make their way into Netflix. I know that other companies are already having those conversations, so I do see a future where podcasts that have a video component do make their way into streamers, and you being a TA probably will be a better position than me that actually know that.
Well, this comes back to our question of what's a podcast, right? If you take a podcast and you put it on Netflix, is it still a podcast? Did it become a TV show all of a sudden magically? Who knows, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think the barrier between all these different types of media is continually breaking down. Is going to keep breaking down. You know, I think sometimes the difference between what is a TV show versus a podcast versus a reel versus a TikTok is vibes a little bit, you know, or maybe it's the platform that it's distributed on, but the things that are multi-platform start to really challenge that. So I think what we're going to see in the future is more of a marrying of different media. And I don't think of that as like an us versus them. I think you can be bullish on podcasts without being bearish on any other type of media. I think people want to have different types of media that they can access. I certainly like having different things. Like the fact that I enjoy spending some time on TikTok doesn't mean that I don't want to watch movies. I love movies, right? And I think most people are that way, where we want to have a media diet that includes a lot of different things. You know, we might just get less and less precious about the different buckets that those things sit in.
Well, it's also behavioral, because if you can listen to your podcast or watch your video or watch your Netflix show or play your Netflix games all in one app, that makes your life a little bit easier, you know? So I can imagine that there's a little bit of if we can aggregate the same content and it's still giving people the opportunity to advertise just the way you would advertise on Apple Podcast or Spotify and run your ads, that would be interesting. If I'm running the subscription, if I'm running Netflix, I want to get as many people using my app as possible for all their content.
Well, and I also think we're building brands. I mean, we've been approached to create a television show, a book, you know, and that's traditional, your sort of traditional media. So it is about what are you going to do as a creator? Do you want to create this ecosystem brand? You know, the PCOS platform that we created is all a part of this. So
Right. Yeah. You know, brings up something interesting. Like, you know, can you just create a podcast anymore? Like, or does it have to be a community? Does it have to have a Substack or a newsletter function? Does it have to have live events? Does it have to have, all these other things? I mean, I probably would argue it's very hard today just to start a podcast. I mean, whether that's, an active social media presence, maybe that may be the answer, but to just have, if your goal is to have listeners and if your goal is to grow, which again, I think for some people, you're trying to reach a very specific community. And that's what I do, honestly. I mean, I'm looking to reach a very specific community. And if it grows, it grows. But it's really, how do I get them that information? How do I create some connective tissue between them? How do I get them talking? Does anybody have a kind of perspective on that?
I think there where you take the word listeners and you replace it with community. And that's the big, I think if there's one big takeaway, we all may do different types of podcasts, but you could have had here someone who's so passionate about watermelons. And they'll tell you every aspect of it, but they do it with such excitement and enthusiasm, and they grow the biggest watermelon farm. That will work. And there could be a podcast around it, and people will find it interesting, and you could build a community around that. So I often get asked, well, people they watch it because they're into politics. I don't really think people even like politics on them. I mean, I get a little bit, but people like passionate people who truly love what they're doing. The host's enthusiasm radiates in it. And that's why in a competitive space of, you said 5 million podcasters, why certain people thrive. Yes, there has to be a modicum of talent. You have to be able to perform and do certain things. You have to have a presence. I get it. But also your authenticity and your enthusiasm shows. And, I think that's just a major part of that. And with all of these other different elements, whether it's, YouTube, Substack, Patreon, you name it, that's about building the community. They don't just want to listen and then shut it off. They want to listen and they want to see. They want to hear from you again. And they want to get your email. And so you have these touch points throughout the day with your audience, and it's a constant dialogue with your community every day. That's why I think it's going in that direction, because of community, which is where we started on this panel.
Well, you don't need $1 million to have a successful podcast. Like the P&L at a tiny scale and a big scale, it's very proportional, right? So I never discourage people who have like a thing they really want to talk about, because maybe their audience is 500, maybe they never chart top 200, but they're doing exactly what they needed to do, keeping their costs so it makes sense for them. Maybe they have one little sponsor on the show that helps them cover what they need to, but they're reaching that core audience that needs to hear what they're producing. And that's the joy of the standard RSS feed podcast, or the just straight up YouTube, is that if you have something that you're passionate about, you can get it up and out immediately without all these, should it go on Netflix? Do I need $10 million? You don't have to do that to be successful.
I'm going to try and get to a few questions. I'm going to shift into politics for a minute. And it's interesting, you just said something that Sarah Longwell from The Bulwark was talking about in relationship to politicians, and the fact that that's all people want today, really, is people just want to hear who they are and hear the passion and to hear what they have to say and to be honest about it. This is, I'm summarizing some of the questions here. This was talked about as the podcast election. People reference it sort of as the manosphere election as well. One of my pushbacks would be, though, and Joe Rogan is one of the most successful podcasts there is. My pushback on that is that he rarely kind of challenges people when they say things that may or may not be fact-based. But Ben, you obviously have a lot of perspective on this last election, and I'm just curious. Why do you think this happened at this time, that this became the podcast election? What do you see going forward?
And I don't want to get all political here, but I think a lot of the right-wing podcasts built a trust with their audience because they weren't talking about politics. They were talking about other topics. Then they flipped the switch with 30 days. And they were like, Trump, 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 Trump. And their audience was like, well, I like this guy. I mean, he's funny. He's a comedian. He's kind of a goofy guy. This comedian, that comedian. And they're telling me I should like this guy. I don't really like politics, but maybe I should give this another try. I don't think a lot of those politics, whether it's, I don't want to mention names here because I don't want to give them promo at the moment, dude. but a lot of them didn't start out overtly political, but they were subterfuge political. That they went political at that last minute when I think it actually mattered. And I think that's problematic. The funny thing about me is I run a political media company and I don't really like politics. And I think that's what actually radiates with people. I like people. I like empathy. I like normalcy. And again, without me getting political here, what's connected for my audience was when I just said, like, this is kind of crazy stuff, right? Like, this is crazy. Like, yeah. I'm like, we all agree? Yeah. Okay. And when that connection was made with the audience, that was more powerful than me saying, but specifically, SB 32 has a clause 33, and if we actually dig into it, don't you think that? That's not what they want to hear. They just want to hear, why are you bullying a marginalized community? Why are you punching down at human beings? Like, we're the United States of America, damn it. Why are you treating human beings like this? And when you speak like that, people remember why we're American, why we're people. Well, wait a minute, we're bullying Canada, we want to attack Greenland. What the hell are we talking about? This is America, wake up. And that's what resonates on the network more than an overtly, I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican and let's not like each other. That to me is why I think we connect in a political medium, because we're talking to people, not talking down. But that's why I think the right-wing stuff ended up working, because it was not political, then it became political, and people didn't even see it coming, including people I know. They're like, he's not political, he's political.
Getting back to the questions here, a lot of things about monetization, revenue. Where do you guys see the trends leading towards in revenue and monetization right now? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I mean, on the whole, it's a growth trend. As an industry, I mean, Hernan is doing the hard work of figuring out the actual numbers here, but by all the different markers, we've grown year over year in terms of the value of this industry. Even, in the years when there were headlines about, things were looking stormy in podcasts, that's still a growth year. So I don't see that stopping. I don't see any reason that wouldn't continue to be the case, especially as you referenced earlier in this, people are waking up to how much influence that podcasters have and what the implications of that can be from an advertising standpoint. So, I have a pretty rosy view of the future of podcasting financially.
I think one of the aha moments that a lot of people that saw the study today that I published came back with is I did not realize that the consumer revenue was so important as part of the total industry. It's close to 30%. And that's because what we used to think as listener revenue was just subscriptions, subscriptions to companies like Wondery Plus or Podimo or Podme. But in the process of doing research, I found so many stories. The biggest one actually had been broken about a month ago by Patreon. They announced that they paid out $473 million to podcasters in 2024. They're by far the biggest community-driven platform driving consumer revenue directly for podcasters. But I found a company based out of India that's making 9 figures in revenue, mostly from the US, in individual transactions. It's called Pocket FM. And again, it's a company that it wouldn't be on anybody's radar. As I went around the world, I found other opportunities and other actual ways of making revenue. For example, when YouTube, as I mentioned before, pays to the podcasters a share of their premium revenue, which now Spotify is doing as well. That is consumer revenue. That's not advertising revenue. And I think consumer revenue consumer revenue pays for the majority of so many other forms of media, from newspapers to television to film. I think that the same is going to be true of podcasts eventually.
We're sadly rounding third on this panel, and I have so much more to talk about. Getting back to the questions here, is there any sort of advice you'd give to somebody who is looking to start a podcast? I mean, Jessica, maybe I'll turn to you. If someone is thinking about it, what are some of the biggest things they need to kind of take into account, and what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I have a couple of stock things I say. I said one earlier, which is everyone wants one, but no one wants to make one. They're not easy. They're not easy to make. Even the easy ones are hard. We also often say, okay, I got it. Episode 1, 2, 3, I understand. What's episode 60? And people are like, ugh. Like, you know, do you want to have it every week, every day, or is this something you want to do seasonally? So really think about the cadence and what you're signing yourself up for, and then there's got to be a real why for it to work. In my opinion, I think when you look at the charts, typically you're looking at those big shows that break through, and even the smaller ones. The hosts have a reason for doing what they're doing. I think Lemonada has been successful because there's a real why there. We started our company by watching, and we just rewatched it with our executive team, the Simon Sinek What is the Why? And so if you can start with that core, this exists because, not to sell widgets or to insert ads, though that's a powerful how. But why does this company exist? Why does the show exist? You can keep coming back to that and growing it, and it will be authentic. It will build the community Ben was talking about. It will exist for a reason. It could be a small gardening podcast all the way to, Julia's Wiser Than Me and everything in between. But there's a real why for it. And if you can't answer that question, then we like to send people back to the drawing board.
Right, yeah. And Josh, you said something really interesting, which spoke to me personally. It's also about what your goal is, right? I mean, like if you, like, playing the guitar and you want to get together with some friends and jam in a garage, like that's great. Like you don't need to be, performing on a big stage of a concert. Same thing goes, you want to write a book, you can just go write a book and publish it now and share it with your friends. I mean, it's why, I think you asked the question, like the why, like why does it kind of need to exist in order for it to be successful? But at the same time, like why, what do you want to get out of it? What's your goal? I think that's probably one of the most important things to think about.
Yeah, and if you're really clear on the why, then you're actually less dependent on the sort of financial outcome or the reception in terms of deciding whether your time was well spent. It's a ton of work. It's a lot of work to do a podcast, and you can have the best intentions in the world and do everything right, and sometimes it just doesn't connect, and sometimes it does, right? But if you're doing this thing because you care about it, you're going to feel good about it either way.
Yeah.
Our why from day one was so clear, and it was to change the world for women and arm them to be their own health advocate. And that was our why. And advertisers have just flooded in because it's authentic and it's real. And like you said, if you have passion and purpose, that's what I would say. Passion and purpose for watermelon, amazing. Passion and purpose for women's health, amazing. And I think just that's the most important thing.
Right.
I would say this, it's okay also if you want to just do it as a hobby, but don't expect that it's going to grow. Like you may just like to do it, which is perfectly fine, but the people who I think succeed treat this like it's their life's work. And every day they put into it everything that they can. And, if you were to open up a store, would you be like, hey, I'm going to show up on Wednesday? But that's sometimes how people approach podcast. Yeah, I'll do it here an hour. I'm not going to prepare. I'm just going to show up. And you can tell it's not a good podcast, not a good show. You're not prepared, but okay, don't expect it to grow. You got to treat it like it's a job. It could be a very fun job and a rewarding one, but you got to plant, you got to water the plant, you got to grow it. And that's what will help.
We can't finish this without talking about AI. AI is infecting every aspect of our lives. It's now part of the podcasting business. You can go on and within a minute, or two, have a, AI podcast with your own voice talking about some subject. Does anybody have a strong feeling on the AI's role in podcasting and if you're using it today? I don't know if whoever wants to take that.
I think in our space, most of the implications are more positive than negative. I don't really see generative AI replacing podcast hosts. The stuff that you can do with Notebook LM or whatever, it's like really impressive, but I don't see it necessarily being an alternative to. I see it being an addition to. AI is leading to a lot of new editing tools, which I think are really interesting. So in some ways, that further democratizes podcasting, makes it even easier to start. You don't have to have the same know-how when it comes to audio editing or video editing. On the other hand, that could eliminate jobs for folks who are entering this space, which is bad for a number of reasons. One of them is this is an apprenticeship business, so starting off as an editor, you learn the skills from a great executive producer to get to that point. So I do worry about the pipeline there, but there's also positives. It's a real two-edged sword. AI for translation, I think, is really interesting, especially for audio-only podcasts. You can't just do subtitles. So to translate in other languages, the fact that you can, in real time or in a very quick time, make a translation in another language is great. These tools are very impressive, but they're not totally there yet on some of these things. And if you just let the AI translate your podcast into Spanish, it's most native speakers. Well, first of all, you need to localize by exactly what Spanish-speaking market you want it to be for. Additionally, a lot of times it'll come through with a bunch of weird idioms no one would ever use, So I think you still need humans involved in that process. It'll obviously keep improving, but But I think that's an amazing thing, right? That's a huge opportunity. Imagine being able to access all the podcasts in every language in the world in your own native language. I mean, that makes the world smaller. I think that makes us able to talk to each other more, fosters more empathy, does all the great things that people here at the Milken Conference are trying to accomplish in the world.
Right, yeah. I really appreciate the fact you brought up jobs, because I think whenever you're talking about AI for every field, we have to remember to go back to jobs and how it's affecting jobs and how the jobs it's replacing, and to be thoughtful and responsible about that fact. Because AI obviously is an amazing tool that's growing in all industries, and that's going to be a pretty radical shift in the country and in the world. I want to finish up, and I'd like you all to sort of answer this. We'll start, Ben, we can start with you. If we're looking to the future, we're coming back here in 5 years. You've all, won your Golden Globes, obviously, by that time. What do you think will sort of be the biggest innovation or biggest change that will define the podcast industry in the future?
What I'm noticing now, I could speak on more of the news side of things, to see the cable news actually play catch up with us. They're trying to get in our spaces, and we now have audience share and a lead. So it'll be interesting to see in the next 3 to 5 years, though, what that dynamic looks like, what consolidation exists, and and just overall what that competition is. Cable news would normally just dump their cable files into YouTube, and now they're treating it like, whoa, we see what MeidasTouch is doing, we see what some of these other networks are doing. How do we get there? So to me, is this how we're all just going to be consuming the news? Is it all going to happen on YouTube, and that there's not really going to be cable news anymore? Maybe a little bit. What does that look like? So that's something that I'm interested in, selfishly interested in leading that.
I think one of the biggest innovations that will happen in the podcast industry is as the medium goes from this open ecosystem to one where there is still one open ecosystem of RSS and the walled gardens. The industry will need to find a common way of defining what is a listen or what's a view or what is watch time, and finding a common way of giving credit to the creators, to the publishers, to the companies that do great work. And I think that's something that the industry will solve, but it needs to solve.
The most exciting coming change for me is how much more global this industry is going to get. People are listening to podcasts all over the world, but the money is really predominantly in a handful of markets where the advertisers and the infrastructure are. But as that starts changing, you're going to see so many more podcast industries come alive, and that's where we're going to see the exponential growth. I've been in podcasting since 2014, and have seen so much growth in the U.S. over that time, and I'm looking at countries all over the world that are going to see that kind of growth over the next 10 years.
I would actually say almost the same thing. I mean, in 5 years, we hope, and we're working on it right now, to be everywhere. We're working on India and the Middle East, and I think that we're such a baby industry right now. And in 5 years, I think what Netflix and all of these, I think it's just going to look so different. And the globalization is what I'm excited about, especially for us when you're trying to change, an actual system.
I wish I had a different answer, but I do think this is going to be the biggest, this interconnectedness that we all feel. I'm a dual citizen in Italy and the United States, and that's a big part of my life. And the Italian market is just starting to really listen to podcasts. And these are people who are driving and have listened to traditional radio for a really long time. But that is true across the entire globe. And the democratization of the English language, for better or for worse, is creating so many opportunities. And then you have these massive brands. I think Unilever spent billions of dollars over the last few years in advertising, and only about 800,000 in digital audio. That's going to break open entire new markets in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, and beyond, Latin America too. So that'll be big for all of us.
That's great. I really appreciate that. Well, that is sadly the end of our time. I've loved talking to you guys. Thank you for the audience. Thank you for the questions. There's some great questions. Sorry I couldn't get to all of them. And thank you to Milken again. This is just a great experience and great conference. So thank you.